I am here with Bryan Caplan. It's such a pleasure to see you today.
Great pleasure to be here with you.
So, you are a Princeton graduated PhD economist, and now you teach at George Mason
Hmm.
University.
Yeah, only
You
for
have this
26 years.
only for 26 years, and you have
All my life.
tenure. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had tenure for a while.
And tenure, I believe, lets you do essentially whatever you want, as long as it's like vaguely in the field of economics. Is that right?
It's even laxer than that.
Brilliant, excellent. The most impressive thing you've done is it's a tie for me. It's between maybe the 8 books that you've written. I believe it's 8, and the blog that you're just so consistent with it. I mean, I see you post like every few days. It's incredible.
Right. I mean, my default is to do every weekday, and then if I'm traveling, I'll cut out days.
Yeah. I mean, that's you have such a consistency too, and you have like 4 kids, and
Only
you're
four.
teaching. only only 4,
Yeah,
is that what you said?
teaching is the least of the responsibilities. It's
Mm.
150 hours a year, honestly.
Oh
This
wow.
is the scam that academia in America is.
Well, at least you're being generously rewarded for it, and the public is, because they're paying you to do what you love instead of like doing some
Yeah,
nonsense that you don't want to do.
that's quite right.
Yeah. Um. So something really interesting that happened to you pretty recently is that you made. So you had a streak of, I believe, 23
Mhm.
correct predictions going back to like the early 2000s, and
That's
then you
correct.
got one wrong. And before I go into
Well,
the
that's
one,
not quite
oh,
right. It's not wrong yet because the bet doesn't actually end until 2030.
okay, yep, yep. All right. So
Yeah, so I haven't lost yet. I'm not optimistic, but I ride things out.
I wouldn't bet on you you getting this one right.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, I do want to get into that. But before we do get into that, you are an excellent predictor, and so I wanted to start off this conversation with having you like predict a few things.
Okay. Sure
Okay,
thing.
cool. And you're not putting money on it, obviously, so this isn't like Bryan doesn't 100% believe these things, but this is kind of a game. So the first question I have for you is, in 20 years, do you think we will go through a national divorce?
In the United States,
Yes.
right? Because you're in Australia, right?
I am, but I'm American as well.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I think that's extraordinarily unlikely for there
Yeah.
to be a national divorce.
Yeah. In 20 years, do you think we will implement a universal basic income?
No, I do not. The cost is astronomical, so it's just at the point where it's just barely even doable unless it's just a very tiny amount. It's very likely that there will be things like some people get something like a universal basic income. In a way, you might say professors kind of do, but that's not what you mean. It just, universal means everybody gets some money, or at least everybody over a certain age gets some money. And yeah, I think that's very unlikely.
It's just undoable. Mm.
Mhm.
Do you think we'll go through a period of hyperinflation in the next 10 years?
And again, this is the United States.
Yep, in the United
Yes,
States.
we're unlikely. I mean, hyperinflation of like even like over 100% per year. Yeah, I'd be amazed if there was even 1 year of that.
I like these answers, Bryan.
Yeah,
I'm, this is this is assuaging my doom and
I mean,
gloom.
look, there's a lot of things to be worried about, but these are all very remote.
And finally, do you think AI will replace over 90% of jobs in the next 20 years?
No, I'd be surprised by 9% of jobs.
That's good. All right. That's all the questions I had for you. Thank you.
All right, well, those are my predictions. The dude abides, the status quo endures.
Um, so to get to the prediction that you haven't lost yet, but or the bet I would say that you haven't lost yet. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've had at least 5 years of friends telling me how fantastic AI is, and every time I actually try it for myself, it's like what you said is just not true. And this combined with the fact that I've just got low base rates for any particular amazing thing happened meant that I was very skeptical when people said that GPT was fantastic. I went and I gave it an exam for, I guess it was my December 2022 exam for labor economics. This was the original ChatGPT based on version 3.5, and it got a D. So I went and said it got a D, and then I said, and I'll bet people that it's not going to improve that quickly. Then there was a guy who said that by the year 2030, it would be able to get A's on 5 out of 6 of my most recent tests. We hammered out that deal. Right, so that the actual bet depends upon getting A's on 5 out of 6 of the last tests preceding 2030. And then what happened 2 months later is it was able to go and get an A on that same exam that got a D on previously. So GPT-4 was able to get an A on that, which then got a ton of attention. I also gave it my policy midterm, and it got the high score on that one. This is one where I had friends saying, you're just being so dogmatic. How can you possibly say it's not great? And I'm like, well, with these other things, they're not really tests. They're just you do something with it and you say, isn't this awesome? To me, what's really impressive is if you set a standard before you go and look at it and then see whether it can do it. To me, these tests that I offer, they require deep thought, deep understanding of the material. So I was very impressed that it could do so well. And when it got a D, that was about what I expected. When it got an A, I was like, oh, wow, that's pretty good. Not what I was thinking. I wouldn't have been shocked if it had gotten up to a B in 5 years, something like that. But I figured that every grade would be a lot more work, and it just leapfrogged over my expectations. So there we are.
And you seem like an eternal optimist, which I do really like about you. But you think that AI isn't going to displace a lot of jobs. We're going to be relatively as normal.
Would think that it will displace a ton of jobs, and that we'll go on and we'll do some totally different things, and we'll basically get the current economy for free, and then we'll reallocate labor to do totally new stuff. That's the truly optimistic position in my view. The reason why I just don't think it's going to displace that many jobs that quickly is that while the technology is indeed impressive, and I totally vouch for that at this point, but here's the thing, we just have a lot of experience in economic history of incredible new technologies that come along and just take a really long time to actually live up to their potential. Electricity, like the electrification of even the American economy, takes decades. Or the one that I keep coming back to, how long did what was the first year when the first true transatlantic phone call was placed? Do you have any idea?
No.
1956. The phone had been around for 80 years before they actually did a transatlantic phone call. From the 20s, you could go and do a call to Newfoundland, and then they would radio it over to Europe. But the first true transatlantic phone call is until 1956, an 80-year wait. Even though you might look at the technology and say, well, this is just going to happen overnight practically. We've already got a transatlantic telegraph cable. How much harder can the telephone cable be? It took 80 years. Same thing with internet commerce. It's just taken decades. And then I was just still at the mall, walking around the Robin Hanson, like, why does this place still exist? There's not much they do here that isn't done better online. It just takes a really long time for technologies to live up to their potential. As to why that is a bit unclear. Probably has a lot to do with human inertia and humans just being stubborn and inflexible. But anyway, whatever it is, it just takes a long time. So I don't think that we're going to see a massive sudden replacement of jobs through AI. I think that it has a lot of potential. It's going to change things a lot over the next 50 years. But the idea that it's going to be disemploying like 90% of the population. Remember, like most of what the population does is services. It's very hard to automate that kind of stuff.
All right, you heard it here first. So the let's go into the meat and potatoes of this call. You have just published a book, I believe, just over a week ago, Voters as Mad Scientists.
Yes.
And it's a brilliant collection of essays. I'm wondering if you can give an elevator pitch to the audience on what you wanted to convey in this book.
Sure. It's called Voters as Mad Scientists, Essays on Political Rationality. It's a collection of essays, things that I wrote for my blog between 2005 and 2018. Or excuse me, 2005 and 2022, my mistake. In any case, I tried to get the top 5% of all the things that I wrote on this theme. There's a lot of topics that I cover. The title essay, which you can see on the cover, is on the theme of people usually think that what's wrong with democracy is that people are voting selfishly, screwing other people over. And I say, like, I wish. If only that were going on, it wouldn't be that bad. See, the real problem is that we are governed by ineffective altruists. people who in some sense care about their countrymen, but who haven't a clue about what's really going on and don't care to learn. I like to think of the mad scientist. You wake up on the table and you're like, what happened? What's going on? And the mad scientist says, don't worry, I'm here to perfect you. Haha. And it's like, no, I don't want it. You would say that because you have not yet been perfected. All right, so that's the situation I say we're in, where people vote for policies. It's not that they're trying to go and screw others over primarily. Rather, they think that they're doing it for the general good. However, there's just so little intellectual attention that people pay to what the true effects of policies are that we just wind up having a lot of awful policies. I'm wrapping up a book on housing regulation, the main theme of which is we have a pile of laws that make it really hard to build housing. The harms that the laws are supposed to stop are trivial, things like, oh, your skyscraper blocked my light. But the damage that they do directly by, say, preventing the building of skyscrapers in high-value areas is astronomical. The main punchline is, in a world where you could just build freely, housing would cost about half of what it does, much less than that in the most desirable places. You could live in an enormous place in a skyscraper in San Francisco for a very reasonable amount if we would just go and use the technology that we have. Unfortunately, the law strangles this potential. And yet people vote for these laws because they think they're good for society. It's not primarily, I'm doing this to protect my real estate values. It's primarily, what about someone who can't see because a skyscraper casts a shadow? What about some birds? What about the historic value? It's like, all this stuff is just a rounding error compared to the game, but people just do not want to hear that. So that's the title essay. And then I go over a lot of other topics. One of them is what psychologists call social desirability bias. It's a very fancy name for something that's pretty obvious, which is that when the truth sounds bad, people lie. Furthermore, sometimes the lies become so ubiquitous, we just stop thinking about them as lies and just start repeating nonsense. Things along the lines of, we shouldn't care about the cost for this thing, we should just, whatever it takes, it saves one life. It's like, well, look, if we literally did that, we couldn't do anything because everything poses a risk to somebody. You've got to make trade-offs, and yet it doesn't sound good. So I talk about that quite a bit, and how especially it plays such a very large role in politics. So much we see in politics comes down to policies do well politically if they sound good, pretty much regardless of their actual concrete effects. I'm working on a larger book about that theme, but here I present the essays that go into the general idea. I'm very happy with that.
There was a lot there. Okay. I think I might focus on your book that just came out, because I haven't read the other book.
These are all essays for the new book.
Are they? Okay.
Although I'm referencing other stuff, but the voters as mad scientists and the social desirability bias, those are all directly within the covers of the new book.
Oh, I haven't read the. I was going to talk about housing, but I think that is a yep. So the Scott Alexander. So the first thing you said is that voters they're not completely selfish. They do what they believe is altruistic.
Barely any sign of voter selfishness at all.
So, one thing that Scott Alexander has said about this topic is that if we're in an in-group, we kind of justify things to ourselves. Like if the ultra rich will justify like a sense of like a trickle-down economics that isn't necessarily actually effective, but because it's kind of in their interest, they end up like massaging the truth and then believing it themselves if they're not incredibly rigorous thinkers. And so they end up acting selfishly, even though they believe, perhaps truly, that they are being selfless.
Right. So in daily life, there's probably something to that. The person that goes and tacks on extra fees to your hotel bill is telling themselves, well, this is all fine, whatever. But in politics, I just say there's almost no sign of that. And this is not just my view. Almost anyone who works with public opinion data will admit there's very little sign that the rich are especially opposed to taxes on the rich. Instead, the rich objectively normally think about the same as other people. The only thing you can say there is that the rich don't consider themselves rich. Almost no one considers himself rich. This is around, and it's not just Americans. It's not just that Americans don't like the idea of being rich. there's basically no country in the world that's ever been studied where more than 1 or 2% of people will admit to being rich. Even when you go and get objective measures of wealth, like do you own multiple homes? So yeah, I own multiple homes, but I'm not rich. That's more of a standard reaction, and it's not just Americans. But you can fits with the idea of it just sounds terrible to say, I'm a rich person. I belong to the rich tribe. I'm an aristocrat. These are all things where you are puffing yourself up and sounding like you think you're better than other people. People go out of their way to avoid even the appearance of that kind of thing, not just in egalitarian societies, but around the world. If you go and really look hard for signs of self-interest in politics, you can find some marginal effects. There's a famous study of public opinion of conscription in the United States. So first result is, contrary to self-interest, men support conscription more than women. All right. It's like, if it were self-interest, the women would say, why should we have to pay for these soldiers? Let's just enslave them, pay them dirt cheap wages, and save some money. But that's not what women say. In fact, it's men that are more supportive of conscription than women. The one real sign of self-interest was they did ask, should we draft the 18-year-olds first and the 19-year-olds? And yes, the 18-year-olds said start with the 19-year-olds. 19-year-olds said start with the 18-year-olds. But normally that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. These very marginal effects. But the normal thing that we see in politics is not just that people don't say, I'm selfish and this is why I think this, but also we just can't get much of a correlation between any objective measure of self-interest and any subjective belief about what policy would be good.
Okay.
Right. I mean, this is really clear in the U.S. right now because it seems like we may have actually gotten to the tipping point where the rich are more likely to be Democrats than the poor. It was for 30 years, it's been a really low correlation, but at least the sign was right. A correlation of like 0.03 to 0.05, so small that you need statistics to even identify it. But at least there was this very slight tendency of the rich to be more Republican. And I think that's actually reversed by this point. I haven't seen the latest data, but given other things we know about how the educated have switched to the Democrats, it would be pretty surprising if the correlation didn't now go the wrong way.
How would you define rich, by the way?
That's a great question. The answer is it's obviously a discrete variable in an attempt to go and capture something that's continuous. But I mean, I would say that I think a reasonable way of using the word would be something like rich is the top 10% of the income distribution.
Okay. Yeah.
If we have like 5 different words, we have like very, let's see, if we had like 4, so you usually do like poor, working class, middle class, upper class, then I think the most natural one is just to say, all right, how about 4 equal categories? Or you might say, it's too much. How about we do poor is the bottom 10%, rich is the top 10%, and the other 2 are the middle 40%. All right, maybe that's closer to what people mean. It's a normal English word, and therefore it's not going to have mathematical precision. At the same time, for someone who owns 2 homes to say I'm not rich, I would just say, it's like, come on. Like, well, then who is? Taylor Swift, the rich person in America? Like, what are you talking about?
I mean, yeah, I think that's probably more like what they imagine, this Richie Rich type scenario. Like, if there's still, I imagine a lot of people are still working very hard once they have 2 homes. And so it probably doesn't feel like it's spectacular.
He's a workaholic, no doubt. I mean, like, again, you could say it's just the top 1%, that kind of thing. Even there's people who are obviously in the top 1% who still think, no, I'm just upper middle.
Yeah.
This is the hilarious American income category that encompasses basically anyone short of a billionaire, apparently.
Well, there's this interesting rhetoric. In your book, you mentioned having material wealth versus material power versus rhetorical power, I believe. And I've been thinking about this a lot as well, because there is this
dominance,
I'm sure you
dominance is the word, dominance.
Oh, dominance. So yeah, sorry. I'm sure you've heard about this. Like, a lot of conservatives will accuse the left of being like victims, in like a victim mentality. And I have this vague theory around that. That's something. So have you heard of the drama triangle at all?
The drama triangle.
Yeah, it's like this.
I don't think so.
It's this sort of psychological idea. and it's you definitely know what it is. So what it is there's the victim and the hero and the perpetrator. So
Okay,
like
yeah.
in this really we most of us have some semblance of one of them, and the more toxic someone is, the more they're going to fall into one of these categories. So they're going to be a bully or like an enabler or a victim all the time. And it seems like
Wait, bully enabler, isn't it bully, victim, or hero?
sorry, say it again.
I thought you said it's like bully, hero, or victim.
Yeah, so like a toxic version, like a perpetrator,
Uh-huh.
hero, victim. So a toxic version would be like an enabler, or like somebody who's claiming disability when they're not really disabled, or like always in a problem and can never get out of it themselves. And a perpetrator would be like a bully or an authoritarian teacher or whatever.
Where do the enablers fit in? I'm confused about the enablers. I thought
Yeah.
I understood.
So like a savior role, in the toxic sense.
Okay,
would be,
so the savior is like the enabler.
yeah.
Codependent.
Yeah, totally codependent. And yeah, I mean, it could be like, I mean, I've just been in relationships before, like, or friendships before, where I'm always helping my friends out and like always giving too much. You know what I mean? So like, there's different versions of this all the time. But and I've found that I think there's this really interesting thing that happens with the drama triangle if you get into it, and it's that most people gravitate towards one, and they oftentimes they hate one. They absolutely cannot stand one. So for me, like, I cannot stand being a victim. I hate the idea of having a victim mentality, and even like at one stage
the people who see themselves as victims.
I can't empathize. I really have a hard time being around people who see themselves as victims. And because I was trying to figure out at one stage why I identify like empathetically more with the right, but I have so many different viewpoints, and a lot of them are very leftist. And I was like, why is it that I identify with the right so easily, tribally, but I have all these leftist views? I just don't like them very much, like the ones in the extreme. And I think I realized that I'm like magnetically opposed to the idea of being a victim and being and I think the right oftentimes takes on like a perpetrator role, like the snowflakes and pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and like this idea of like American dominance, and it's that
sounds like it could either be hero or bully, right?
I think both of them have hero traits. I think both of them want to be like allies on the left. And then the right are often like, we're trying to save trans kids or whatever it is. Like, I think they both have savior roles, but I think they're both magnetically opposed to. The left hates being perpetrator, and they can't stand people who are perpetrators, and then the right hates victims, and they can't stand victims. This is just my idea, but I'm wondering what you think.
I mean, I guess I would say that most obviously the perpetrator / hero role, or the bully / hero role, is much in dispute, and basically both left and right go and see themselves as heroes, and the other side's activists as bullies. So I think that's a lot of what's going on. So again, you might think, no, like the right are heroes and the left are bullies, or the other way around. I think the answer is you really need, in a way, to know who's correct before you can know whether you're a hero or a bully.
Yeah,
and
I think
someone says, "Hey, you hey, you horrible monster! Stop going and doing trans surgeries on kids."
Yeah.
On the one hand, you could say, "Well, you're a bully. You're trying to go and stop kids from getting their gender affirming care." On the other hand, you say, "No, I'm a hero. I'm trying to stop adults from butchering these kids." You need to know the answer to the question before you can know what you really are. That's the big problem. And of course, during the Cold War, both sides saw the other side as bullies and themselves as heroes. And the answer is, yeah, well, we kind of have to know whether communism is the correct view or not. And then we'll be able to figure out whether you are heroes or bullies. Right. So, I mean, I guess I would just say this is one where there's a deeper question that has to be answered before you can really categorize people. Sort of the idea that there's a psychology of this, which is independent of the actual situation. That makes a bit more sense. So that's one where you really kind of need some mind reading, though. Say, look, this person, what's up with that person? sometimes you could actually go and listen to them and watch their faces as they talk and say, look at this person. They seem to actually be getting some sadistic pleasure out of going and calling someone else snowflake, other people snowflakes. It's like that seems more like a bully psychology, regardless of the accuracy. And on the other hand, you could just see a person who has the heroic attitude of, look, I really don't care what you do to me, but I'm just going to stand up for this. And they don't seem to be getting joy out of the standing up. They're just doing it because it's a Martin Luther, here I stand, I could do no other. And that's where you can say, I'm like looking inside their heads, looking at their faces as they speak, either give them an Academy Award or say they believe that's their role.
Yeah, very interesting. I was going to tie that back to your idea of having rhetorical dominance, because it does seem like the left has this, where when people say like, oh, I'm not rich, it seems like they're playing into the rhetorical dominance of the left, which is something like, I need to, I can't be the one at the top. Like, I need to be the people, you know, I guess we always want to be the underdog anyway, but we don't want to be the giant towering king over the peasants. So I guess it maybe.
So the idea of this is that there are a lot of groups that we think of as dominant. So classically the white male. So well, white males have so whites have higher incomes than that most non-white groups. Males have higher incomes than women. You'll go and see that men dominate in politics. They dominate the top levels of the business world, religion, so on, science. Then you'll say, okay, well, these groups are at the top. But on the other hand, and so you say, well, that kind of makes sense. But there's another sense in which you could say they don't seem to have a lot of dominance because none of these groups would feel very comfortable giving a speech saying, I'm so great, I deserve to rule. Rather, there's a strongly apologetic element. And again, if you want to go and give a speech where you just feel like you can totally get away with it, this would be one where you go and say, this is a speech about how whites have mistreated people of color. This is a speech about how men have mistreated women. This is a speech about how the rich have mistreated the poor. And these are all speeches that people feel like they can not only get away with, but pretty much count on other people nodding their heads and saying, that's a perfectly fine thing to do. Whereas you flip it around to go and say, look, I'm a rich person. I'm tired of the way that rich people have been oppressed by our society. We pay almost all the taxes. We get almost all the insults. And it's like, I mean, there's something to that too. So I call the second one rhetorical dominance. In a way, this is an attempt to just dissolve a long-standing dispute, like who really rules. And it's like, well, there's two different senses of having dominance in society. People that are angry about one group focus on one. People who are angry about the other group focus on the other. And then just to realize that a lot of what's going on is there is this hope that I think a lot of people secretly have, if only I could get both. If only, which is what you see in dictatorships, obviously. It's what you see in theocracies, what you see in, say, the Soviet Union. It's one where, first of all, monarchy, obviously, where you've got the people at the top, they're rich, they're powerful, they got the armies, but they also have the crowns. Everyone talks about how great they are and butters them up. Or think about like the Pope, right? Walking around Vatican City. The guy's loaded, obviously. He's walking around and wearing solid gold. And he's also infallible on top of that. So it's like, wow, if I could get that, now that would be awesome. You go to a place like Saudi Arabia, you can see, the Saudi royal family, they got both dominances. They are fabulously rich, fabulously powerful, and everyone has to talk as if they are fantastic, wonderful human beings in every possible way. In freer countries, we don't generally see such a fusion of the two kinds of dominance. Rather, there's kind of there's a strange kind of Cold War, although it's basically one where those with rhetorical dominance heap scorn upon those with material dominance, and those with material dominance just sort of like and keep trying to do what they do and stay rich and stay out of the radar, stay out of the limelight.
That was an incredible extrapolation on the essay. Good. Yeah, you've clearly thought about this a lot.
I try, Serene.
I have this bone to pick with what I perceive to be the economic way of thinking, although I'm certainly not well versed in economics. And so
all right, let's hear it.
I do wonder if economics is the study of what makes us wealthy, and I mean it's the study of countries and their economic, what's best for the country economically, but like it's not always what's best for individuals. And if we're making a lot of decisions based on economics, I wonder if we're somewhat neglecting like how it affects individuals and our happiness and our livelihood and our health.
All right, so there's a few things going on there. I mean, I actually say, especially today, most economists justifying economics as a study of human behavior. I've often said, in a perfect world, economics would be called sociology. It's really just the study of society and all the such questions. We've got economics of the family. We got economics of the arts. We got an economics of everything. It's true that traditionally economists are focused on material well-being, economic growth, issues like that. For those questions, what I would say is, and I don't think this is an unusual view among economists, I think it's just the standard one. It's like, look, society is just a bunch of individuals. If countries are getting rich, then that means individuals are in that country on average getting rich. It's true that it's possible for a country to get a lot richer while there being some people that lost out. So the internet comes along, life gets better, but travel agents have their businesses destroyed. So, and in fact, if you pay attention to the history of progress, you'll see there's no such thing as economic progress that hurts no one. All economic progress hurts somebody. The COVID vaccine was bad for mortuaries. Of course it was. All right, so there's just no such thing as progress that literally helps 100% of people, and that's worth keeping in mind. I think what a lot of people are worried about is progress where it enriches society on average, but the gains are so concentrated among the rich that most people lose. So you can imagine something where the billionaires multiply their income 1,000-fold, this double social income, but everybody else actually sees their income go down. It's common to worry. If you know no facts and no history, it's a totally reasonable worry. But we do know facts. We do know history. What we can say is, in all of economic history, there has never, ever, with no exception of which I'm aware, been a large increase in overall production that was not broadly beneficial.
Oh, interesting. Really?
Like industrialization. One of the main things that happens in the Industrial Revolution is they figure out a way to make clothes much cheaper than they used to be. Do you really think the factory owners wore 1 million t-shirts after the Industrial Revolution? What do? They make a pile of clothes and they sell them to other people who until that time in history were lucky to own 2 sets of clothes. That is just one example. Or like to COVID vaccines, they mainly benefit pharmaceutical companies. They're lucky to have gotten a couple % of the total gains they delivered. Almost all the gains went to all the people who were able to survive and resume normal life. Or the internet, the computer programmers who got most of the value from the internet. That's crazy. Most of the internet's free. How could the people be making much money off of it compared to all these incredible gains of this free stuff that is just pouring on us? I talk about this in the new book quite a bit as well. How if you had explained how the internet worked to economists back in the 80s, I think most of them would have laughed in your face and said, that's ridiculous. We're not going to have a big industry where the main product is free. So that would be the first reaction. And it's like, yeah, well, guess what, guys? You were totally wrong. There's tons of free stuff and seems to be continuing endlessly. But then here's the next thing that piles the insanity on top of that surprise, namely, will people, if this happens, if you have this incredible new industry that gives people the totality of human knowledge for free, will there be a massive amount of complaining about monopoly and abuse of big business? And this is one, if you had told economists this, they'd say, well, like, your hypothetical is crazy. It's not going to be free, but if it is free, people won't complain about it. Why would they? It's too good to be true. And we also got that. We got a pile of free stuff and people saying, oh, Facebook's stealing my data, something I didn't even know I had 10 years ago. That's terrible. It's like, they're taking something that is totally worthless. No one wants your stupid data. It's worth pennies at most. It's like the only value comes when you go and get millions of people's worth of data. Then you can get something worthwhile. Yeah, there's a reason why you don't get paid for your data, because your data is a rounding error. And in exchange, you get tons of free stuff, and you're going to complain about that?
And you
So I
said in the
had
essay,
yeah.
most people, the vast majority of people, wouldn't pay like $1 a day to offset these issues. Like it's
Yeah,
just,
like obviously,
yeah.
because often you can. For example, like I am one of the people that actually pays to get my YouTube commercial free.
Mm-hmm.
As to, I doubt it's even 10%, maybe even 5% of people in my boat. I just find the ads really annoying, and so I'm paying like $10 a month, and then I never have to see their stupid ads again.
I do too. It's
To
great.
me, like for a while I wasn't paying, and like the ads are so repetitive and just so oh, I can't, they're terrible ads. They're so annoying. And then I'm like, well, why don't I just solve my problem, pay them some money, and never have to see the ads again? I'm like,
Yep.
all right, problem solved. That's done.
Mm.
Decades ago, I wrote an ad to the magazine Adbusters, which is a magazine all about how terrible the advertising industry is, produced by people who are exiles from the industry. And I wrote a letter saying, look, I understand you don't like advertising. I don't like it either. But here's how I pay about $20 a month, and I experience pretty much no advertising.
Mm.
So instead of complaining, how about you just pay a little extra money and then solve your problem once and for all?
Mm. To go back to my original question, and this, I guess, this could very well tie into your books on your thoughts and books on feminism as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's this real eruption of women in the workplace, and well, I think it's awesome. Eruption, like in historical I don't know, more women started working historically.
Like starting like 70 years ago.
I'm sure you're familiar.
Normally the eruption has to be more recent, and
Oh,
sure.
yeah.
The eruption of women, yes.
The eruption of women. And I do wonder about whether that's had some. I mean, I sometimes I'm focusing on the negative impacts of that. Like I'm learning more about, for instance, breastfeeding, and like historically people would breastfeed, women would breastfeed for like 3 years, right? And bottles are not the same as breasts, and the infant has different muscles. So like bottle feeding, in my opinion, isn't necessarily the best way to go. And while women in the workplace is such a great economic, has such massive economic impacts on society, like I do wonder if, I mean, we're kind of going against evolution, which is something I generally think is not a good thing, and I try to avoid in my day-to-day life is going against the way we're like naturally supposed to live.
I guess I start out by saying that that's one of the smallest goings against evolution that I can think of. I mean, the much bigger one is birth control. Right? That's going in dramatically changing.
That also seems to have some impact on society.
Well, how about vaccination? Vaccinations is really changing things from the way it would be under evolution, or just saving premature babies. There are just a lot of things to be done. I would say that once you understand how primitive human beings actually live, you realize, wow, this is an evolutionary equilibrium, but God, it's terrible. Like the life expectancy is low, just the quality of life is very low. Obviously, if you go and study a primitive society, you can find something good to say about it. But yeah, I would say it's very little good to say about it. I'd say that good riddance to that, if that's what's natural in evolution. I do think the idea of it's important to pay attention to human psychology, a lot of which depends upon evolution, that makes a lot more sense to me. That's one where it's like, okay, we evolved to want to live, and we figured out ways of extending life and reducing risk. That's all good. On the other hand, we were also really evolved to like being around other human beings, and loneliness is really bad for us. And that's something where I would say the sensible thing is to think about how can we go and use everything that we know to satisfy these basic human longings and emotions, rather than just saying we want to keep doing it the normal way. Normally, the natural way is just a very poor way of getting the job done. On this specific question of women working, so I know that there's been quite a bit of work by Emily Oster recently, and it looks pretty solid to me. It comes down to, if you just go and compare siblings, one of whom was breastfed and one who was bottle fed, you can barely find any difference in their health outcomes. And probably IQ as well. So that's actually not a big deal. I mean, my view actually is anything that we can do to make people feel more relaxed about having more kids is totally a great idea. It's way better, like even if there was some moderate reduction in health, to go and guilt people to the point where it's like, well, if I had a kid, I would have to go and breastfeed for 3 years. I don't want to breastfeed for 3 years, so I'm not going to have a kid. I think that's a lot more of what's going on in society. I don't know where breastfeeding stands in East Asia, but the general feeling of you're a terrible parent unless you give up your entire life for your child's betterment is extremely strong in East Asia. And we see, wow, like Korea's down to 0.8 kids per woman. Like if that was your philosophy, who would want to have kids? It's like parents count too, and why should parents have to live a miserable life just because they are choosing to share the gift of life with somebody else? To me, that makes a lot of sense. That's why I'm happy having 4 kids. If I had to go and just suffer for the rest of my life for their sake, then wouldn't sound like that good of a deal to go and have 4, maybe even 1.
Even
oh, sorry, yes.
Oh, even it strikes me as so many of my friends who are really well, I don't have kids. I would like to have kids fairly soon. But so many of my friends who are, especially the well-educated, intelligent, like, healthier ones, just don't want to have kids. And it seems like in the future, I'm slightly concerned that we're going to be missing out on a generation of super intelligent, well-raised children because, millennials worry about the environment and, all these, having their freedom and all these extra factors.
Correct. I think the truth is that we've seen this IQ gradient for fertility for as long as we got data. So it's just at least for as long as we've known what's going on, as long as we've been measuring intelligence and fertility, we've known that smarter people have fewer kids. Right? So that's just looking at the background. This is not a new thing. What is new actually is just so many high IQ women just having 0 kids. That's pretty rare. There are a few earlier episodes, but I think that is quite unusual in human history for that to happen, just for it to become common to have none at all. As to what's going on, probably the single biggest factor for number of kids people have, honestly, is just peer pressure. Why are people having 4 kids during the baby boom? If you just look around for objective factors, it's hard to find anything that really remotely explains what happened. On the other hand, if you look around and say people don't want to have no kids when the typical woman is having 4 kids, that seems to fit really well, and in general seems to fit around the world. It seems like this is one of the most conformity-related traits or behaviors in the world, where people look around their society and say, what is the normal number of kids to have? Or they may look around their subculture, like if you're an unusual religion, if you're a Mormon, then it's normal to have more kids. If you're like a Shaker, it's normal to have no kids, that kind of thing.
Jewish people have.
So I think the first thing is conformity. I don't think, in terms of that, actual conscious philosophizing about how it's bad for the planet, I think that's pretty unlikely. But I think the other big factor is precisely this idea of, if I do have kids, I have to go and give up my whole life for them to be a decent person. So once you think of it as a binary choice of either I have no kids and live a happy life, or I have some kids and I live a miserable life, then I understand why people are doing it that way, right? And one thing that is notable is that the higher IQ you are, the less likely you are to have unintended pregnancies.
Really?
So lower IQ,
the less likely, of course,
lower IQ people have more unintended pregnancies. Higher IQ people have more intended pregnancies. This is in terms of the rate. Definitely, there's a very low rate of unintended pregnancies among college-educated women in the United States. Given that college-educated women have very few unintended pregnancies, it really does come down to you are envisioning 2 different lives for yourself. There's the life without kids, there's the life with kids. If it is part of your mindset that if you have kids, you must go and be a tiger mom or a dragon dad, you must basically give up most of the fun in your life for the sake of this child so they can have a decent future, well, then I understand why people don't want to have them. I've got a whole book called Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids, arguing that this is all basically scientifically inaccurate. It is not true that the way you raise your kids has a big effect upon their adult outcome. The reason why kids resemble their parents is overwhelmingly genetics in the long run, which means that you can have a whole lot of kids like me and not go and do a bunch of unpleasant stuff and guilt-free, because it's actually just a myth and this is very important in the first place.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Why do you think that high IQ women aren't having kids so often?
Right. So why aren't high IQ women having many kids?
Mm-hmm.
A big part of it is that peer effect. If other people in your relevant subculture aren't doing it, then normal human nature is not to want to do it either. If the others are doing it, then you want to do it too. Like really, without this insight that fertility is very conformity based, you can't explain baby booms and baby busts very well. You can't explain things like why is when it is easiest to have kids materially, we have the fewest. So we've got that. Another part is this very high foresight that we see among high IQ women. Almost all their pregnancies are planned, combined with this philosophy of you must go and do this very high intensive, like this energy intensive, low fun parenting style. So if you combine a lot of foresight with normal human feelings about how I'd like to enjoy my life sometimes, and a theory that a responsible parent cannot enjoy their life, then I think it makes sense that you'll see so few high IQ women having kids. A lot of what I did in my book, Selfish Reason to Have More Kids, is just to say there's a factual error in here. It's just not true that you need to do this for your kids' well-being. And that, like, out of all the things I've ever written, that's the only book that I have good evidence that made much difference to the world. Because I've got literally hundreds of people have told me they've had additional kids because of that book.
Oh, cool.
And if you just use a standard economist $10 million value of life number, that means that book created billions of dollars of value. I only got a very, very tiny share of those billions.
Go buy Bryan's books, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank him. So my pet theory as to why IQ women are not having kids is I mean it seems obvious to me that women date up in status, and
yes, of course.
if you suddenly have a lot of women in the force who are like if you were in the past you were just your status probably came from your family a lot of times, what your father did, and you didn't really have a way to gain status in a really highly intensive way. But now if you're a surgeon as a woman, like who else is higher than you in status? I mean, there are a few people, but it's not like you have a massive pool available.
Right. I mean, that's probably explaining some of it, but the lines of status are not quite so clear cut. What I would say is the main status bar or caste system in the United States is based on education. And what we'll see is that, in particular, the really big caste barrier is the bachelor's degree. So as long as, basically, it's quite unusual to see couples where one has a bachelor's degree, one does not, especially where the woman has a bachelor's degree and the man does not. But so most couples either both don't or both do. Once you're over that barrier, like the social stigma to having someone with an advanced degree marry someone with a BA is not that big. The social stigma of, for example, a teacher marrying an investment banker isn't that big. It's one where probably you want, like, especially if you're a woman who's a surgeon, maybe you don't want to marry a teacher, but it's not one that is really socially awkward. It's not one where people actually have the classic caste barrier of like, these things should not be blended. No, these are two different states of being. No. So that's where I would say that, there is this barrier. Now, it can get very finely graded, but I don't think it is that strong. Like, for example, it's still fine for, say, an English professor to marry an economics professor. And I think even if the English professor is a man and the econ professor is a woman, that's not one that causes much social discomfort. It's more about these status markers than actual, these educational markers, these credentials rather than income per se. There is, I agree that there is something in what you're saying, but again, I think it's one that would just not affect that many women because there's just not that many women who are in this truly elevated caste of I'm a surgeon or something like that, where there'd just be very few men that would even be possible mates. I think it has a lot more to do with this fear of kids could mess up my career, which is one of the sacrifices. There's kids mess up my fun, kids mess up my career. So these are both going on. So I think that is a substantial part of it. I mean, also, one general rule that I have is that a lot of people imagine that society is judging them when in fact it's all in their heads. They're judging themselves and then projecting their judgments onto society. I know it's true. Sometimes strangers judge you. Sometimes your friends or family judge you. But he says most people just don't have that much spare bandwidth to worry about other people. They're focused on themselves. in a way, we're too narcissistic to worry that much about other people. So,
Mm.
There are some famous thought experiments involving what's called the spotlight effect. Famous one involves you give someone a stupid shirt, like a Barry Manilow shirt, and have them walk through a room, and then you ask the person, how many people noticed your stupid shirt? It's like, everybody noticed my stupid shirt. And then you actually ask the people in the room, they're like, who, what? This is actually much more typical in life, that people are barely even aware that you're alive. Therefore, when you get all worked up over other people judging you, it's mostly like they probably barely even notice that you're there. You just do what you want. What's the difference? Not in every case. There's some, especially the main counterexample I would say is boss, coworkers. Those are the cases where you should be mindful. Am I doing something that's messing up my career? But most of the time, like, you're wearing shorts and sandals, no one else is. Yeah, what are they going to do about it? People don't even know who you are.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have one more question regarding your book. It's another little something I found in your book that I found interesting was you had an essay about I don't remember what it's called, but it was about how for one example you gave that was that when a hawk, so somebody who's I guess really into war or very passionate about war, talks about going to war, they don't display emotions that you would expect somebody who's really thought about this really considerately to display. So they're not saying like, we've weighed all the evidence out and we have to go to war and we're going to kill thousands of casualties and it's a terrible shame, but we have to do it. And I think you explained that you would trust them a lot more if they acted as such. But instead they're saying, we're the best, USA, let's go get him.
Right. Or there's the Ted Cruz quote in that essay. I don't know if sand can glow, but we're going to find out. Ha, 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 ha.
Yeah. Terrifying.
Like, you understand these weapons will go and kill a lot of innocent people. They're just too big to go and not have massive collateral damage.
War doesn't have no collateral damage. It never does.
Yeah. I mean, modern weapons are the ones where often there's just no feasible way to use them. You can't use a nuclear weapon without killing a lot of innocent people. I mean, it's sort of like the simplest way of thinking about it is this. If there was someone who said, look, there's a 50% chance this will make things better, 30% chance it will make no difference, 20% chance it will make it worse. I like those odds. Let's do it. If I heard someone like that, I would be so stunned. I'd be like, this person deserves my attention. This person is thoughtful. This person's reasonable. But we know there's no politician pushes a war with that kind of nonsense. It's all, or with that kind of honesty. Rather, it's always with the nonsense of, we will win for sure. The only danger is not doing enough. That kind of stuff. And it's like, what do you mean? Like you can't just give me that kind of guarantee. What are you talking about?
And look, I'm all for radical honesty. I'm very pro honesty, but I think evolutionarily we're tribal creatures as well. Like if we're not, we tend to dehumanize the other side, and that's how you win a war. I mean, the tribe who carefully considered whether raping and pillaging was a good idea didn't win. You know, they were too busy fighting amongst themselves. The one who won was the one who thought that the enemy was all inhuman and we need to kill them all.
Although it's also worth pointing out that the tribe that thinks the other side is inhuman and we should kill them all often wound up getting killed because they picked a fight they couldn't win.
Maybe that's probably true as well.
Yes, there's a lot of survival value to just not fighting and just trying to go and keep your powder dry and hope that the horror just washes over you without actually making much difference. This is just a more general point. There's just so much absurd false hope that people have of the idea of, look, if we just fight our hardest, we'll prevail. It's like, yeah, well, what about all the losers who fought their hardest and lost? What about them? It's totally common. What are you talking about?
You just thought about all of these points so in depth. It's incredible, Ryan.
Well, I really appreciate it, Serene. I tried to go and pick the 5% best essays that I've written on these topics over the last 18 years, or the 18 years that I was doing it. A lot of it is, I think these essays are good, but I don't expect that people will go through everything I wrote and find the 50 out of 1,000 essays that are really great. And so
it's not just the essay. I mean, the essays are pretty short, right? The essays are short, but then when you extrapolate on them, it's like you have like 10 times more information behind every word than you've actually let on. Like you've just condensed it into the most easily palatable form possible.
Yeah, well, I mean, I really try. I appreciate that you appreciate it, Serena. It means a lot.
Yeah. Okay. So, where can people find you online? Uh,
Right. So first of all, the book is on Amazon.com. It's $12 for the paperback, $9.99 for the ebook. This is actually the fourth in a book of essays in an 8-book series. But you can get all of my books on Amazon, including the New York Times bestseller "Open Borders: The Science and Ethics of Immigration." I blog for Bet on It, so that's my Substack. Like as we were saying, I generally do 5 posts per week on that. And then my website's just bcaplan.com. If you just Google my name, there's a few other Bryan Caplans who spelled exactly my way, but I know one of them, and he gets a lot of my hate mail, and I've apologized. He's a cool guy. I like the other Bryan Caplan.
I highly recommend The Case Against Education, by the way. Oh.
Maybe I deserve the hate mail, but that guy, he hasn't done anything. Leave him alone.
We love you, other Bryan Caplan. Thanks for putting up with the hate mail.
Yeah.
No, I personally highly recommend The Case Against Education. It changed my mind on a lot of educational prospects. If I have kids, I'm strongly considering homeschooling, and the title is correct. It's not clickbait. It's absolutely 100% what's in the book.
Yeah, I mean, people often think that I'm going out of my way to troll people. And look, everything I write is completely sincere. I don't need to exaggerate. I don't need to deliberately tone it up, or dial it up in order to get attention. This is just what I really think, said in the way that I think it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Hopefully, I'll see you another time.
All right, sounds good. All right,
so much
so great meeting you,
for coming on.
Certainly, if you're ever in DC, let me know.